Thoughts on QTE? I think QTEs are fine as long as you know to expect them and the game does them well. I don't think they're innately bad. I just think that period of time in like 2010 or whatever, where like every cutscene you have like 2 minutes of no gameplay, and then out of nowhere, the like mob boss you're talking to turns around and throws a knife at you, and you have 0.8 seconds to dodge it, or you have to start the cutscene over from the beginning with no, and no like cutscene skip button or whatever. Like that's what I'm talking about. That's what made people mad about it. Yeah, the David Cage shit basically. I never minded it in Resident Evil 4. That's how they force you to watch. Well, you heard of Darkwood? It's pretty fun. Yeah, I've heard of Darkwood. I've played Darkwood. How do you find a fan of Darkwood? Don't worry, they'll tell you. People bring that shit up. It's only got 18,000 reviews on Steam, but I hear about Darkwood way the more than a bunch of other like high quality games with around that like level of popularity. What even is Darkwood? This is v.gg. You were thinking of Google. The only good QTE is in Sonic Rush? No. I don't think that the only good anything is in a Sonic game. I'm sorry to single you out for this one, but I don't think that's true. Did you play Detroit Become Human? Nah, but I've seen other people play it like 4 times. I wouldn't have fun playing a game like that. I play games for gameplay. I'll watch other people play a story game, but the only video games with a good enough story to be worth my time and attention that aren't video like mechanics based are Disco Elysium, maybe The Witcher 3, and obscure untranslated Japanese visual novels that take 117 hours to complete. Everything else is like the video games just need to catch up a little bit, is what I'm saying. I haven't played Yakuza, and I can't read Japanese. Nine Souls is on the list. I'll get to it. You can't deny the fact that like the average video game is terribly written, even now that video games are written 20 times better than they were a decade ago. Baldur's Gate 3 not mentioned. Okay, I like Baldur's Gate 3, but like for me the fun of that game was the mechanics of getting through it. Baldur's Gate 3 is charming, but I wouldn't say it's like phenomenally well written. It's well written, but like maybe in the context of like a video game story. If you read a book and the book played out as your run in Baldur's Gate 3 did, would you be impressed by how it was written? And my guess is probably not. I think that it's very well written for a video game, but that's grading on a curve. Hades has good writing. Hades has good character writing, like dialogue, which is good. But, that's not quite the same as good writing. Example of a well-written video game. What do you want from me? Disco Elysium. I'm sorry, there aren't that many. it's genuinely like a very small list. Like people will tell you to go back to like, I don't know, the original Fallouts or Neverwinter Nights or something, but like God's honest truth, for the most part, what people think of as good video game writing is when characters in games are well written. But that's not always the same thing. I mean, that's just a component of it, I haven't played the original Silent Hills. I've seen the remake. I've seen Resident Evil 2 played a bunch. Destiny 2 is amazing writing. I don't believe that. I don't think Destiny 2 can be well written because of the game it's attached to, is what I mean. Like, writing doesn't just mean you do a game and then you encounter a section with good writing or like good lore or something. You know what I mean? Like, writing has like it's like this overarching narrative that you like as a whole package. And the thing is about writing, and this is the up thing about writing, okay? And this is specific to writing because people won't say this about gameplay. If you play a game that's excellent, but there's like a bonus extra infinite mode that kind of sucks to play that's totally optional, and you ignore that, people will say the gameplay is good. But if you have writing for a game that's really good, but then there's like a bit of it that's slop, that brings down the whole thing. Because you can't ignore a chunk of writing differently, that like you can't ignore it the way you can ignore like an optional chunk of gameplay, because writing like pulls there are like threads that tie everything together. You're differentiating character writing from like story writing. Yeah, well, yeah, of course, those are different things. Yeah, character writing, like the ability to write like good dialogue, totally different from having good writing broadly. I mean, it's a part of it, but it's just like one part of a whole. Astarion. Okay, so this is what I mean. Astarion's fun to play with. But if Astarion was a character in a book or even a TV show, he would be like normal or maybe even subpar in his writing. Because the way Baldur's Gate 3 is structured, you only get maybe like 10 to 15 minutes of him talking over the entirety of his character arc. And it's really difficult to parse that with like the depth, what's being built through on that, Sounds like you just didn't talk to him. I did. I exhausted all the dialogue options and I did all the side stuff. I beat honor mode. I didn't die in an entire hard mode campaign. I don't want to hear from you. Okay, I'm better than you. It's not just like part of it is just like the structure of the game, I think, which makes it really difficult to work around. I mean, you're always going to get like trade-offs in terms of players' attention. You're not going to have video games that are as well written as books if a significant part of the video game is dedicated to making the fireball explode really big. You know what I mean? Like your attention is a finite resource. Where you direct it to kind of like changes what boomer take. It's not a boomer take. It's literally true. Like you have a finite attention span in terms of what you can direct your energy towards. And if a large part of the game is dedicated towards like the mechanical complexities of keeping the best like armor and weapons and spell combos and da, like that detracts from other elements. That doesn't mean it's bad. It's just like necessary trade-offs you have to make. Of course it is. It doesn't detract. It doesn't detract innately, but it does pull attention away from. There are ways that a narrative can be improved through interactivity, but it does pull your attention away from those things. Like, of course, a book is all writing. The entirety of a book is writing. So all the attention of the book is the writing. Whereas in a game, because there are other considerations, it pulls your attention away. That's not a bad thing. I'm not saying that's bullshit. I'm one guying right now. I'm not letting you one guy me. You can have your opinion. Have you heard of Rain World? I've beat Rain World. The verisimilitude of gameplay and story seems hard about. Yeah, it is. But like, that's the difficulty, right? Like, do you like you're talking to a guy who spends a lot of his free time playing games. I'm not an anti-video game guy. Have you played mouthwashing? Yes, I've played mouthwashing. Thoughts on Spec Ops: The Line genuinely curious? Okay, I'm not indicting all video game writing. I'm only saying that you have different expectations about writing in video games because there are other things in the video game that are building up a cohesive narrative experience outside of just the writing. Like your experience in playing the game, bro, was just curious. I'm answering. That's a big thing, Dustin DPS. Are you factoring the design of the battle/combat as part of writing? I mean, that's part of the overall experience, right? Like if it's presenting information to you, depending on what the nature of the fight is, yeah, you can get like a lot from that, I think. Vosh answers like a dad. I'm 30 years old. When you hit my age, okay, and people start asking you questions, all right, you see how it feels, all right? Thoughts on Portal 2 writing? Not as good as Portal 1, but I think Portal's writing is considered really good because they understood what the limits of their writing, what they could do with the writing were, and they committed to that really hard. Like, rather than try to build... How do I put this? I think that the experience of going through Half-Life's story kind of sucks. Half-Life 1 and Half-Life 2, mostly Half-Life 2, because a lot of it is you standing in a room, unable to do anything for multiple minutes, mute, jumping around, hitting stuff with a crowbar, while other characters pretend you're like a serious guy, and they're all like explaining how you're going to save the world, you know? And I think that one way that Portal and Portal 2 really benefit writing-wise is that all of the writing is designed around you just playing through the game as quickly as possible, never stopping, and that makes sense narratively because Shell wants to get through the test chambers to escape. It makes sense in the way the game is designed because GLaDOS wants you to move through them as quickly as possible, so it doesn't break the flow that you would attempt to do that while she's trying to talk to you. And it makes sense in the context of like the insults she's directing your way. It doesn't interrupt your gameplay at all. It takes place over it like a radio track. And I think that for that reason, the writing in Portal is basically just like background lore and setting with really witty character writing for literally one character in Portal 1, and for Portal 2, of course, 2 characters. But because they understood what they could do and what the limits of the good... Like, imagine how much it would suck if in Portal 2 where there was a point where you stop and, like, humans break into GLaDOS's testing chambers, and for 3 minutes they're like, Shell, thank God, I thought you were dead. And they're, like, talking to you or something, and you just have to, like, stand there. You're, like, jumping around, but you can't do anything. Like, if you were put in, like, a Half-Life 2 cutscene situation... in Portal, it would feel like ass. And that's because you've gotten used to like a better way of having the story like presented to you, I guess. So yeah, I think Portal's writing is pretty good because it understands the limitations, but that's exactly what I mean about like a finite attention span being directed, because most of your attention in Portal is going to navigating the puzzles. So the dialogue is meant to complement that to the extent they can get away with without it being a distraction. You get what I mean, right? The reason why they have to stop your fun in Half-Life 2 to give you the storyline shit is because it's like characters bantering and talking about the world and da-da-da. And like you can't be running around shooting while listening to that, so they have to stop you, and that doesn't feel as good. Yeah, you get me. Same thing with Hades. Yeah, and I think Hades does this I think Hades does this really well too, because Hades also gets that like you want to just burn through hell, or Hades, as quickly as you can. So the dialogue you get is just little snippets of it presented like drip feed, you know, over the course of the, and the only time you really like sit down for a conversation is in the breaks between runs. They understand the empty spaces where they can paint narrative, and they take advantage of that. And I think that's fantastic. Yes, Disco Elysium gets to have a full narrative game because the game is the narrative. Like the game of Disco Elysium, it is literally like a detective mystery where the dialogue choices and how you manage them in your stats through those conversations is the game. So they can dedicate 100% of their of the player's attention towards the writing. And that's the reason why I bet you, you motherfucker have skipped through so much dialogue in your life, because most dialogue is boring bullshit. Are you reading all the quest notes in World of Warcraft? I need 10. My little sister Dana ran off, and I need to get bare asses to warm the fire for when she gets back. Like, no, come on, don't be stupid. Most of the time, there's literally like millions of paragraphs of that shit. You're skipping through it. Okay, fine. Maybe some of you psychos aren't. I am, okay? Nobody skips through Disco Elysium's dialogue. Nobody does. And you know what else? Nobody wants to skip through the dialogue in Hades or in Portal, because they do a really good job of pacing it out in such a way that it never feels like it's overbearing or detracting from the gameplay. Is what I'm saying making sense now? That good writing in a game is a lot more complicated than just like, is the dialogue witty, but there's like this synthesis between like the player's attention and what you're doing in like an interactive sense. Because the pacing of reading a book in a literal like experiential sense is literally how quickly your eyes scan across the paper. That's the speed at which you process a book. In a game, you have like a whole bunch of, and you can pause a game. So sometimes it's like, okay, maybe your rate at moving through dialogue is like at this clip normally, but there's a big chunk coming up that you need to get. So they pause it so you have more attention. You can get through it faster. It's a whole thing. It's very difficult. It's very, very difficult. I have a lot of respect. You know, and when I say like Baldur's Gate 3's writing isn't exceptional in the context of like if it was written into a book, not me insulting Baldur's Gate 3, game of the year, easy, okay? I'm just trying to contextualize my statements here, all right? I'm just saying it's difficult. Thoughts on Firewatch? Firewatch was an excellent game, and the outrage against it was from midwits. Yeah, sure, Baldur's Gate isn't a book, so it's fine, but Disco Elysium could be a book and would be fine. If Disco Elysium was a book, I mean, you'd have to reword it a little, but it'd be fine. What was the problem with Firewatch? It was just like a late Gamergate flare-up. I don't even remember the details. They already have a Disco Elysium book? Really? I haven't read it. Probably never will, because I might dislike it, and that would make me sad. It's impressive to include this much nuance in your responses, but shit, it would be so tedious to qualify every statement the way you have to. Well, I do tend to open a little hot, but like I like discussing stuff like this, so you know, that's fine by me. I mean, I enjoy topics like this, I guess. What Remains of Edith Finch is probably the best video game story I've ever played. Yeah, and again, like that's an example of all your attention being dedicated to the narrative, so nothing else is distracting you. You're not playing Tetris while they're explaining how the kid drowned or whatever. Of course, what makes Disco Elysium exceptional is not only is it so well written, but it also has like genuinely compelling gameplay that encourages you to think about your choices, and that's very difficult to balance both of those. What about mouthwashing? I gotta be real with you, mouthwashing is an excellent mood piece. In terms of its writing, I mean, I'm not saying it's bad. I mean, can we acknowledge, if nothing else, that like the visuals of the game and not its narrative are the main reason it's popped off like this? The character design of the lady. It's about the vibe. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a mood piece. There's nothing wrong with a mood piece. I would say that, Silent Hill 2 is maybe the most celebrated video game mood piece in history. But people don't talk about it like it's a mood piece, you know? I would say it is. I would say that overwhelmingly the feeling people get left with after playing Silent Hill 2 isn't like a specific narrative understanding. It's more so this like the feelings packed into it, like it's a delivery piece. What does mood piece mean? It's kind of like a broad shot term, but my understanding is that like when you say something's a mood piece, it's not so much about conveying a specific story. The point is more about leaving you with a feeling. And mood pieces tend to be shorter, but not always. There are a lot of things that would Shadow of the Colossus, great example of a game that has like a big mood piece element, though of course I wouldn't say it's just that.